I'm ready to rock and roll. Yes.
Okay, great. So, hello, everybody. I'm Lisa Nielsen. I'm the author of a blog called The Innovative Educator, and I've been a public school educator and administrator for more than 2 decades. And I'm very excited to have with us a guest today. But first, let me give you some background. This is part three in a series of conversations where homeschoolers have provided unique insights about what it means for students to learn, socialize, and prepare for success in the world without the full support of school. And we're looking at this because many families are reconsidering what they're doing now that there's a pandemic, now that going back to school might not be the safest thing for children, and families have some fears. So today we will hear insights from Laurie A Couture. She is a veteran homeschooler who has taken this path with her own child and helped many others to do the same. She is also the author of a book called Instead of Medicating and Punishing, and she has another book coming up, which she will be telling us about. The goal of this series is, as I said, to help parents make these informed decisions about whether or not to return to school. And I just want parents to feel good and safe and informed about their decision. And before we start, I also want to remind parents whatever you decide to do, you can always change your mind.
Mhm.
So if you went in one direction and you thought, oh my God, how come I did this? You could go in another direction and you could change your mind again. So don't feel so scared to try an option that might not be mainstream. So today, we are going to discuss a concern some parents have voiced, which is this. What if my child just sits around all day playing video games? And I'm really excited to talk to Laurie about this topic. I've been following her for at least 10 years, reading things that she's written on this topic. I've also followed her and her son Bryson, who I know was a fan of video games. And she worked with her son to address this topic. And she has some brilliant and unique insights and advice for parents who have this fear. So, without further ado, let's turn it over to the expert. Laurie, if you could share a little bit about your story with Bryson, how you address this issue, and just how you've helped other parents do the same and what you've found, and just give us some of your brilliance.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me today, Lisa. Um, when my son came into my life through adoption when he was 11 years old, and right before he turned 12, we started our homeschool journey. When my son was in the foster care system, he was pretty much hooked on just about every type of screen available in 2005. And in fact, he told me that he would sometimes have three going at once. Um, so when he first came, he was quite incapacitated when it came to doing anything other than video games at first. So we had to set some limits in the beginning, just because obviously we had a lot to do with bonding. But when it came to homeschooling, um, what had happened was there was an interesting thing. At that point, by the time we started homeschooling, we had put video games to the weekend so that Bryson was able to um, focus on play, dramatic play, bonding, doing outdoor activities, and he was really thriving and not really wanting much to do with the screens once we did that. And he was really on board with it. Once we discussed the importance of it, he didn't have too much resistance to it because he was just so excited to have a family. Um, Interestingly, though, when we started homeschooling, Bryson was coming with me to work in the beginning, and we talk about all the different options single parents have to use and two working parents. Well, that was one of our first early options as Bryson came to work with me, and that included going to meetings and conventions and conferences. So there was this one particular workshop I had to attend at a conference about the detriments of screens to children's brains. Now, this was grad school level, professional material, and we brought a bag of toys and things for my son to work with so that if he wanted to, he could just, kind of hang out and do his thing while we listened to the workshops. Well, my son chose to actually take out a notebook and start listening to the workshop. Keep in mind, he was only 12 years old. And I didn't realize that he was taking all this in. So after that, there was a break. And during the breaks, we would go out. There was this big fairgrounds behind us, and he would just run around during the breaks with me. And he came up to me and he says, Mom, he says, I want you to stop letting me play video games. And so I said to him, well, okay, that's a pretty drastic tall order. Are you sure about this? Tell me a little bit about this. And he basically explained to me that when he says, well, Mom, when, at first when we had cut down video games to an hour a day, that didn't really work because then I was craving it all the other hours. And he says, and then when it was, on the weekends, he said, then I was hover around the TV waiting for that time to begin. And it was true. When we would try to taper it down, Bryson would always be hovering around the TV, waiting for that time to open up. And because of that, there was a lot of anxiety about going outside, anxiety about starting other projects, because that video game time was so, almost calling to him and beckoning him, and to the point where he was craving it to the degree that he couldn't focus on anything else. So he said to me, I can't control it, Mom. He says, I'd like it out of my life. And he said,
what was he playing, Laurie, just so people have a sense? Even if you don't know the exact game, but like what kind
sure.
of?
Oh, he was playing, he was watching, movies. We didn't have cable TV, but he was watching movies, and he was playing the GameCube and the Game Boy Advance at the time. And we also had, later was given to us the Game Boy that had the pen, the DS. That came a little bit later. Somebody had given it to us, and he himself decided to hand it to me and say, I don't want it. And so he had various different games that went with the GameCube, including the Marios and Pikmin and the Zelda games and so on and so forth, all the popular ones. And so he and I discussed this, and he told me, Mom, I listened to what they said. He said, and everything they said is true to what I've gone through, and I can't control it. And he said to me, I only want to play when and he gave the name of our mentee. We mentored an at-risk child. And that child used to like to engage when he first came over and play Mario Kart and a few games. So we had decided to leave it at those times. And then we, as a family, a whole family, used to go, we still do, we go up to this great arcade that is the largest video arcade in the world that we know of. And so by not engaging with video games throughout the year, when you go to Fun Spot, it is the most amazing experience, because you get to just go crazy with all the new games, the old games, the vintage games. They have an arcade museum upstairs of all the vintage pinball and video games. And so there's a tremendous amount of joy around that, because it's such a novelty. So we did
I
that.
want to pause you for a second, because what you're saying is when you go to the arcade with a family, you're like doing an activity together. It's not the child like just zoomed in to this thing and putting the rest of the world out, but
exactly. And it's really special because it's a novelty. It's not something we do all the time. So we ended up kind of getting into a groove of, we would occasionally watch movies in the winter, we preferably going to the movie theater, but sometimes we would watch it. I would introduce him to an 80s television show or something. And we'd do that when it was the winter and when there really wasn't anything going on. The video games, sometimes what we would do is we would pull out my 10 video game systems that were all vintage, and we would do a video game marathon with either my son and I or with the family. And it was amazing how fun these were. But interestingly, whenever we did the video game marathon, when the time was up, the next day, my son would hover around the TV and you could see that craving come back and say, Mom, can we just do it one more day? And I'd say to him, would you like to do it another day? And then I would say, well, if you do it another day, will it go on to 3 days, 4 days? What do you think would be a great time to cut off our video game marathon? And he'd say, you're right, let's end it. Let's end it yesterday, and so he was able to, he had the insights about himself to be able to see that screen media what had an effect upon him and a capturing of his neurology that he could not control.
And so what you did and what you're saying and what a lot of families have not done is like, the video games are often a separate thing. The kids are doing that. They might not even quite know or understand the game, but you were in the online world of Bryson. You saw what he was doing. Then you talked to him about what he was doing and you showed him other choices. And then you just had these meaningful conversations about the choices that he was making. So it wasn't even, you didn't tell him, do not play video games. No. You gave him information so that he could come to you with a preference about what might be best for him. And I think that is such an important and powerful thing to do. So maybe can you share for families how they can engage in that kind of conversation with, like, well, let me just say this. This is what I hear some families doing. They say to their child, okay, you have X amount of time, and when that time is up, you have to leave the screen. And then the kid might have a tantrum if they're younger, or just get really mad if they're older. And it's like this battle. So what can families do that's different? What are some tips to help them not butt heads with their child?
Okay, so what I would suggest to start with is before the best way to start is not to introduce screens to kids in the first place. Let that unfold more when the child is a lot older and has had enough time to dramatically play and experience the world. The other piece of it is you can't just take away something from a child and not fill that void. These children are getting actual opioid and endorphin boosts and analgesia from video games and screens. So you can't just take that away. It's going to trigger a meltdown. In fact, there have been cases where parents have stepped in and taken away the cell phone or the video games, and children have attempted murder. That is how serious the addiction can be for some kids. So what I suggest to parents is fill your child's time with such an array of diverse and fun and stimulating activities, especially outdoors. Family activities, activities with friends, hands-on activities that video games and screens are crowded out of the picture to begin with. So it can't be just that you're sitting around and not offering an enriching environment and then expecting kids to entertain themselves. We have to, as homeschooling parents, be actively engaged in bringing the world to our children and exposing them to opportunities and activities until they can kind of take off on that. And the whole purpose is, rather than removing, is to crowd out, while at the same time having those conversations. You can do challenges like, well, are you able to go 24 hours without this? Of course, for me, it always comes back to nature. Nature's intent. Nature intends. Now, nature doesn't care about anybody's parenting philosophies. People don't understand that nature doesn't care about your choices or your philosophies. Nature has a specific set of conditions that each organism must have in order to thrive. And nature has that same thing for human children as it does for animal children or a plant or anything else to thrive. And nature intends nature intends for children of all ages. And when I say children, I mean all the way through adolescence, children to be moving almost nonstop, outdoors, climbing, jumping, running, learning with their hands and their five senses, involved directly with their families, with their communities, and in mixed age groups of kids. That can't be done when children are sitting sedentary, staring at a tiny screen, sometimes as small as this and maybe as wide as this. The medical problems alone should be concerning to parents. And what scares me is that parents, often when you bring up this topic, they are going more on personal opinions, their viewpoints of video games when they were children, which are night and day to today's video games. And they are going by possibly the guilt they feel that if they were to look at new information that perhaps these things are dangerous to children, then that cognitive dissonance makes it difficult for them to accept that perhaps they need to make some changes, or maybe, those choices weren't so good. So I find that parents will fight tooth and nail to come up with justifications why video games are great, why screens are great, when the science is showing otherwise and nature is telling us otherwise. We always need to take it back to nature.
I'm thinking of my particular context. New York City parents might be hard to get their kids outside, but not just that, but right now in the time of coronavirus and the pandemic, they're working and their children are home and they're just stressed out and they're hearing this and they're like, oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to, I could barely hang on right now. I'm trying to do my work. And when my kid is sitting there playing a video game, at least they're occupied. So how do we help those parents who are stressed out doing this for the first time? Their kids are home, they're trying to juggle all this. How can we help them and give them some advice so that their kids are making choices that are healthy for themselves?
I think it's the same thing that I already reiterated. You need to find stimulating activities that will crowd out those screens. I understand working parents, we have to work from home sometimes. The important thing is starting small, introducing one activity at a time, and creating challenges for children. Okay, we're gonna turn off the video games for the next 2 hours. It should never be a cold turkey thing. It should be a gradual thing. First of all, there is no one magic bullet answer for everybody, because every family is different and every child is playing video games or on social media for a different reason. There are a lot of unmet needs that drive people, children especially, to these screens. And so if we don't know what the unmet need is, then we aren't going to be able to fulfill that. The unmet need could be that the child and the parent have a rift in their relationship, or that there are not enough stimulating activities in the home. Or the child is so addicted that he or she is not able to do this on their own, and the parent just will not set a limit, that they're wishy-washy about it, and they won't take a stand and be a parent, which is what nature does expect us to do. That is fully within the bounds of unschooling, because nature intends for us to protect our children and not expose them to harm.
Can you give parents some ideas for younger kids, middle-aged kids, and teenagers of some activities that they can do with their kids? Because the interesting thing, and I know you know this, but I know also like your whole world is about natural learning.
Yeah.
Many of these parents have not really had to be super responsible for themselves filling the time of their children. So school has filled the time, and after school activities have filled the time. So what are some of the things like that parents who are dealing with this for the first time, what are some things that they can do with their kids or support their children in doing so that they're doing healthier activities?
Well, there are just an endless amount of activities that can be done. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, we could sit here and, go on forever, but I mean, I have a couple things here listed.
And also, as you're responding, I'm also remembering some of the stuff that I knew Bryson did, like some of the businesses they started even at a young age.
Exactly. Yeah, Bryson had started a business when he was 12 years old. He ran it for 3 years, and he made these little stuffed creatures called fiends. I was going to see if I actually have a couple right here. Give me a second. These are some of the later fiends that he made. Um, Here's one he did of himself for me as a gift when he was older. So he made these little creatures called fiends, and he actually did his own bookkeeping. He did his own sales, and he went around the community to find local businesses that would sell the fiends. And we landed a few interviews with the newspaper. So he was really busy with that. My son loved to study various subjects. We used to read side by side together, even if it was different things. We played a lot of traditional board and dice games. My son actually found, researched a Viking game and actually learned through some research how to recreate a board game that is now defunct called Nefertafel. He created the game pieces by oxidizing pieces of metal on some and then allowing some to color a different way naturally. So he actually colored these using natural processes of oxidization and sun exposure. And then he figured out the rules, and he made the game board and we played it. So, you know, there are other things like there's indie games like Munchkin, Catan, Flux, Find the MacGuffin, in addition to all the traditional games like chess, checkers. Parents and kids can film a horror movie, a comedy, or a drama together. You could do a sleight of hand magic show, play glow in the dark Nerf gun, have Nerf gun fights in the house, build living room forts, build with Lego, connects, tinker toys, write songs together, do arts and crafts projects, cook something, invent something, sew or knit something, put on a family talent show. The list goes on and on. Parents can do creative things like put on heritage festivals of all the different nationalities that their family has been connected to. Buy equipment kits, like for example, mechanics kits or science kits. There is an endless array of things. Fix things, do Mad Libs together, come up with, invent a house rule Mad Libs. If you can get outdoors, explore your national parks, your state parks, your local parks in your community. Play all kinds of sports. Try out a sport you've never tried before. There is an endless amount of diversity and possibility, even in the COVID situation, if parents think outside the box. Now, you can take the same approach to screens as I did to school. Don't look at screens as an option for a child's activity or childcare. If you pretend screens don't exist, what would you do? What supplies might you need in your home? Do you need to get markers and scissors and construction paper, art supplies, cooking supplies, Legos, puzzles? Could you build something with wood? Does your child want to work with small engines? Could you build a box car together or a scooter? The amount of ideas out there is endless once people start. But the problem is screens have become kids' go-to. So it's not that kids are just using screens to research. A lot of times they're not. They're using screens to pass the time. And I do want to talk a little bit about the detrimental effects to the body and to the mind of this at some point in our discussion. And the fact that today's video game and social media content is nothing like when you and I were kids.
Well, yeah, and when you were talking, I was thinking about that. I'm thinking about one of my colleagues and friends who, her son, young boy, I think he's about 6, and during this time, you know, her family is very cognizant of fitness and health,
Yeah.
and he started making exercise videos, and my I am doing daily exercise routines, and he wants to make exercise videos so that we're following him and watching his video. And this, he's like amazing and so entertaining and very good at what he does at 6 years old. And I'm just thinking even something like that, because he watches his parents with their health and fitness. And, you know, if you're talking to your children about being healthy and being fit, then they start to realize what is working and what's not working. And I would say an interesting place where technology fits in here reminds me of another friend of mine who has a teenage son who, during this time when some families, especially like in New York City, were kind of trapped inside, he became very obsessed with fitness and watching the tracker, and then really understanding like body fat and what goes in and what goes out and heart rate. And now he's giving his mother routines on how to properly exercise. And so when you have these conversations about healthy living and healthy life, it gets to the idea of you don't want to be sitting, and let's do things together and let's get healthy together. So I think that when we just start to get cognizant of, you know, whether it's screen time or whether it's seat time. I remember a cover, I think, of Time magazine that said, sitting is the new smoking. Like, you want to be up and moving. You want to be aware of your weight and your BMI and what makes you feel good and what makes you feel healthy. And this other friend of mine, was when the pandemic first started and people were really just like in their homes, not even moving around. She said when she first went supermarket shopping, she was exhausted, and she's like, oh my God, I've been sitting for a month. And so, you know, just having these conversations with your children and your family about what healthy living is makes you really realize that you can't sit around without movement and being very cognizant of what's happening. So I think having those conversations can really help. And also the parent, as I'm thinking of the friends I'm talking about, is not always the one with the answers. Like, my friend's son is making these exercise videos for her friend. My other friend's son was like, oh my God, we got tired shopping and became obsessed with how we can be healthier together. So I think having these great conversations with your children, I mean, your son was the one who said to you, Mom, you need to help me stop playing these video games and do something better. And how exciting when he found one of his passions, making the, I'm just gonna call them dolls, but I forgot the name of them.
Yeah. Well, Bryson's passion was music, so he was always singing and always creating music. So, but as he got older and decided that he actually wanted to start pursuing his music career early, then most of his time was taken up by his music and by gigging and band practices and booking himself on the radio. He would drive a half an hour on his bike. He'd pick up his bike when I was at work and go bike ride a half an hour and book himself on to the local radio station. He'd book gigs. We'd go to gigs together. He recorded 3 total albums. So he was busy, and there was just really no room for screens other than when it was needed for some sort of research, and then it was very focused. He also is very passionate about Dungeons and Dragons. That is a great thing. A parent can decide to be the DM, the dungeon master, or, you know, and host a Dungeons and Dragon group in your home or out in the community. Create a homeschool group. We did that. We created a homeschool group with a certain theme. There is so much to do. But I do want to talk, like I said, a little bit. It goes beyond just physical fitness. There are actually some specific dangers to the screen medium itself. So yes, fitness is one of them, a lack of fitness. In fact, research is showing that children are dramatically less, have dramatically less muscle strength and physical fitness than they did decades ago. And that is primarily because of screens and sitting sedentary on screens.
Well, and also when kids are schooled, recess is pretty much gone. Lunch is sitting and not moving. So during the school day, there's, I was listening to Peter Gray in an interview recently, and he said back when he was in school, they had 30-minute recess in the morning, 30-minute recess in the afternoon, hour for lunch, 2 hours a day where you're running around.
Absolutely. And that wasn't enough. Yeah, and that's not even enough for children.
Well,
children should be
earlier, and then we went home and we ran around on the streets, you know, and so they're not getting a lot of that today.
No, they're not. I think school is the biggest detriment to children's health, and I've been saying that for decades, that it's the #1 detriment. But the concerning thing is that the screen medium itself actually creates an addictive process in the brain. It it leads to a release of endogenous opioids, which means our brains produce natural opioids, and the screen medium actually shuts down the left brain and secretes that chemical. So what it does is it creates dopamine highs and endorphin lows, which are self-soothing analgesia. So if you're feeling bad, depressed, you look at a screen, you engage with a screen, and you're going to feel an analgesia or a pain-killing effect. So what happens is, this happens whether it's television. Television has never been innocuous. And in fact, the natural parents of the 60s and 70s knew that, and they spoke out about it very eloquently. And it was only until very recent years, the 2000s, that parents, natural parents, seem to do a 180 and suddenly think, well, you know, we know that schooling and other forms of oppression of children are harmful, but yet we're going to let this dangerous indoctrinating medium into our child's life. So it doesn't make sense. But unfortunately, what it does is it creates an addiction or a repetitive behavior that children will engage in spite of negative consequences. There's a big difference between neurochemical stimulation that harms the brain and neurochemical stimulation that enriches the brain. Nature and play and hands-on activities and rough and tumble and dramatic play and fine motor play, that all enriches the brain. Exercise is neurochemical stimulation that causes the brain to thrive. But screen addiction actually creates a very dangerous situation in the brain. It also worsens with time so that the receptors for dopamine start to atrophy, so that the child needs more and more rewards in order to get that same dopamine boost. In fact, children who play video games, today's massively multiplayer online RPGs, and the social media where you're getting the snaps and the likes and you know, the follows and snap streaks and everything, those are akin to the Las Vegas slot machine and how those are engineered to keep that dopamine flowing. It's not the reward itself that causes the addiction, it's the anticipation of the reward that causes the dopamine release. So in today's games that they call sandbox, the 8th generation games that are like sandbox games like Minecraft that never have an ending point, there is never a time when you can get enough, because there's always the anticipation of another reward. Now remember, it's not the reward itself that releases the dopamine, it's the anticipation. So there's always that, mom, one more moment. I got to check this one more thing. I got to check here. I got to do this one more part. I have to just do this one more section. You know, I have to, you know, and so now you have a situation where you have esports where platforms like Twitch are actually allowing you to live stream your video gaming, and people are paying money to kids to watch them play video games. So some kids aren't even playing them anymore, they're just watching. You have AI video games like Pokemon Go. Again, the constant anticipation, I might catch a Pokemon over there. Let's drive, I mean, teenagers driving with their cars, walking. The other issue that it's causing is, for the young children, it's causing fine motor skills fine motor skill deficits that are causing children that were not born with coordination issues to now need occupational therapy. They are too weak to hold a pencil from the constant scrolling and tapping. Nerve endings of the hands are being damaged. The skeletal muscles, especially the neck, shoulder, and back. The muscles, the ligaments of the hands, the arms, and the shoulders. The eyes. A lot of children are suffering dry eyes. Some of the ophthalmologists are saying children's eyes are looking like the eyes of senior citizens. They're losing their peripheral vision because they're so focused. They're losing their ability to be farsighted. Studies have shown that the fibers between the two halves of the brain, the corpus callosum, are reducing, so that there's less ability for the two sides of the brain to communicate. And there's also lower myelination of nerve cells, which allow us to communicate fast between nerve cells. There's lower myelination in the nerve cells of children who play video games. So social skills have been damaged. Melatonin for sleep is actually shut off from the blue light. So when children are playing video games or looking at their social media at night, or they have a television screen on at night, that actually is killing their melatonin production. So it's affecting their sleep. Not to mention the EMFs and radio frequencies, the electromagnetic frequencies that children are being exposed to by having these phones near their body. It's also decreasing literacy skills. My second book is going to get deep into the research for this.
What is the name of your upcoming book, Laurie?
My upcoming book is called Nurturing and Empowering Our Sons. It's a focus on boys right now, as they are really struggling, and they are the primary victims of suicide. 80% of suicides are boys and men, and children, boys between the ages of 10 and 24 commit suicide at 5 times the rate of girls. My son was one of those victims. And there is a desperate need to rescue our boys from this very toxic culture that includes them just basically playing video games to the point where some of these young adult boys or young men are not able to hold jobs, or they don't want to drive cars. Some of them are not even able to engage in family. They can't launch as adults. They can't complete their education of any type because they're so addicted. They don't want to go out of the house. In fact, South Korea actually has video game addiction centers. The situation is so bad there, where they have children actually attending these rehab programs for people addicted. It's a very serious thing, and so it does bother me that people don't take it seriously. It does decrease the D2 dopamine receptors, which means that the child has to crave more and more in order to get that dopamine release.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. So I'm thinking of something I had read a long time ago, and I just remember the name of the article was Change or Die. And it studied all of these people who had health issues that were going to cause them to die if they didn't change what they were doing. And many people did not change, things like their smoking habits or their eating habits. But then there was a follow-up that said it wasn't that these people didn't want to change, they just didn't know how to change, and they didn't believe that they could change.
Yes.
And once we start to give them those tools, things might change. So I'm just thinking of families who are watching this, and they're like, but I don't even know what to do. They're throwing up their hands. I don't know how to change. I don't know how to change my kid. What's some advice that you can give parents, like maybe 3 things that they can do that are practical right now to support their children, and also knowing that the parents are super stressed right now? And I'm particularly, being an educator, I'm thinking of my teacher friends who have maybe 2 or 3 kids and are teaching, and the kids are at home, and they're like, oh my God, I'm so stressed. I don't even know how to begin doing the things that Laurie is talking about. So what's some advice that you have?
So plan ahead some activities that you can do together. Start with one activity. Rather than feeling overwhelmed that this has to be done overnight, it's about gradually pushing out those screens. It's not about, okay, tomorrow no screens, because that, how that works when you try to force something cold turkey, especially if the child is heavily addicted to this. They're going to have a total meltdown, and it's not going to, and if anything, it's going to damage your ability to connect with them. And that's definitely not a detachment parenting standpoint. The point is, start to sit down as a family and plan out a few activities. Say, hey, let's plan some things to do tomorrow. How about we pull out that Lego set? Let's set a timer. How much time should we spend on that? So strategize with the kids on ways to make sure that it's not just, because what I see today, one of the phenomenons that I had started to see with children in the early 2000s in my work with children, is that suddenly children were not able to play. That is a terrifying thing, because the work of children is to play. And children would pull out all the toys, and they would dump over buckets and they would pull out, they would explore every toy I had in the room, but they couldn't sit and play. So what might help is to say, not just let's pull out the Lego set or let's pull out the sewing supplies. It's, hey, let's devote the next couple hours to doing this. Because otherwise, if you don't, they're going to pull it out. They're going to get bored in 2 seconds or 5 minutes, and they're going to say, I'm bored. We have to get away from this idea that we need to always entertain our kids to the point where they never can experience boredom. It's important for them to experience the emotion of boredom unplugged so that they can come up with what are their passions. Video games are not passions. It's a self-soothing, repetitive, self-soothing practice to release endorphins and dopamine. A passion is something that you are wired to do. Something that
now our kids have been in school, so many of them, being told what to do all day. They haven't been asked, what are you passionate about? They haven't, you know, they've been told that you do this, then you do this. And then after you do all that, you play these organized sports. So how do they even help their child start to figure out what they might really love and care about?
Yeah, it's you really have to unplug. And again, it's gradual, Lisa. It's unless you talk to the child and they agree to go cold turkey, that's different. If they really see that is a benefit, try that. But again, you want to try to keep exposing your child to many different activities. If you think they never would be into music or sewing or cooking or chainmail or building with wood, challenge that. Expose your child to all these things. Open the hood of an old car and say, hey, have you ever thought of fixing this? What could we do? I mean, if your child's older, of course. There are so many possibilities. Sit down together and say, how many possibilities could we list together? And if you're finding that it's very hard to wean off the screens at first, put the screens to good use. Let's film a horror movie. Let's film a fitness video, like you said. So start with that, but then gradually move away from that. So it's not about doing it all at once. It's about starting out with a few ideas and then picking a new idea. Okay, let's list 5 new things we could try as a family, 5 new things you could try. Be open to your child teaching you. That's another thing, is children love to show us what they love to do.
And I also liked how you were saying you connected with other homeschooling families, and it's something right now in the time of this pandemic, they're calling them pandemic pods. But the point is help, I'm thinking of some families where they might only have one child or the children are very far apart in age. So if you can find a couple other families where, you're practicing what you need to practice, what your family feels comfortable practicing, and then your kids can connect together and learn things and play things and do things together.
Now remember, a pandemic pod is not the same thing as a homeschool. A pandemic pod is a very new thing that's actually based on the 1960s models of the small schools. A pandemic pod is basically you're hiring a teacher. So again, somebody else is telling your kid what to do.
Yeah, and I guess I shouldn't really necessarily say that, but I'm just thinking finding some other kids in your community.
What I'm going to say is that a homeschool group is when kids can get together and just play. They direct their own interests. They, and preferably the key is getting outdoors. Even in the city, there are places of nature. There are places in New York City that have nature. Get yourself to those places. Get your family to those places. Put the screens away and observe. Get out a notebook. Draw, sketch. Let's sketch some of the birds. Let's sketch some of the trees. Let's pull out a tree field guide and see if we can identify these trees. How do you suppose that's an oak? Tell me some of the features that make an oak tree versus a maple. So the key is have a plan to start with, and then these things will just start organically unfolding.
And just from your expertise and knowledge, at what age do you think a few kids can go out alone to the park? If the parents, they're working, they're doing their thing, what age do you think the parents can say?
I can't answer that question, Lisa, because every child is different, and every child has a different, a different history. and sense of what they can and can't handle. And in a city, I would be very cautious about letting children unsupervised of any age. I think the thing would be to get together with other groups and have an area where kids can explore. If you live in a more of a natural setting, well, then that's a little different. You know,
Right, right.
luckily my community, you know, our community was such that my son could go off. But until he was able to do that, I always kind of went with him or had him go with a group of friends. Having, you know, children in groups is probably the best thing. So I can't answer that question because
Yeah, but well, you
I
did
go and
answer
say
it.
12, then that may not be right for this 12-year-old.
No, but what you said is really helpful, is that have groups of kids and maybe
Yes,
there's an adult that can be there off to the
yes,
side
some adults.
if
That's right.
making sure everything, if anyone needs to come to them, they
That's
can.
right. Have
And
adults in this vicinity.
Right.
Doesn't have to be every parent, but maybe one parent takes a group of kids
Yeah,
and does some work on their own and not hovering. That's the important thing. Let kids
Right.
be free, but just be there to kind of make sure everybody's okay. And if they need something, you're there to check in. Make sure to bring water and snacks and, you know, activities to, yeah, bath balls, basketball, soccer ball, jump ropes, you name it. Bring scooters, bikes,
yeah.
you know, do things.
So
You
I
know.
think, so I'm just going to try to sum up some of the big ideas is don't impose this on your child. You know, the no video games, stop now, have conversations, expose them to information. The thing I'm hearing is, you know, kids want you to be in their world. It
Yes.
would be really fun for, I'm thinking of my own childhood where our family said to us, there's my dog, excuse me. Our family said, you know what, go into the bedroom, come up with something exciting, put a show on, and then come out and perform it for us. And we felt so special that we made and our families,
Yeah.
I think they weren't pretending. I think they really liked it. So
Yeah.
empowering your kids to feel
You know,
really special about what they're doing and being a part of it. And we were on our own for an hour or two trying to make the best show ever. Sorry, you were going to say something.
My sister and I did something hilarious at my grandmother's house. We had my great grandparents lived there, and you know, they were of the stock of being born in 1893 and early 1900, and then my grandparents also were there. And we took my grandmother's supplies and we made all these drawings and books. We made all these little books. We stapled them together, and then we held a yard sale and made our family pay for them. So you know what? How cool is that? Go ahead and pay $5 for your kids' art. You know, the key is we were busy, we were doing things. Let your kids rough and tumble in your house. I had an apartment full of big teenage boys. I didn't care if they jumped on my couch. You know, I had to replace my couch after, you know, but you know what? You know, let them get through those years and then you can replace the furniture when they're in their 20s. You know, say yes more than you say no to things. Say yes to turning your living room into a fortress of Nerf bullets. Say yes to kids pulling out all the cooking supplies and going to town and cooking something great. Say yes to them doing, instead of constantly saying that's unsafe, let them take physical risks and do physical activities that are risky and fun, as long as it's within reason. Obviously, you need, you know, safety is important. But I see so many parents that the child does one little thing, like tries to walk up a slide. That's unsafe, you know, or they're calling their name nonstop. That's one, that's two. And it's like, oh my gosh, let your child be a child, you know?
Yeah. So Laurie, you've given us like so many good ideas and research and advice. Do you want to say some final words to wrap up for families?
Yeah. Just to remember, it's our responsibility as parents to set the example and to protect our children. So we do need to set that limit, because if we are expecting children to do that, then what is the point of parents? Children have parents because we are there to guide them. And sometimes we do have to step in if something is unsafe. Our job is to protect them. Our job is also to show an example. So if they see us constantly on our phones, and we don't look them in the eye and stop talking, stop looking down when they're talking, then they're going to take that example for us. So they need to see us doing fun activities that don't require a screen, reading real paper books, drawing, doing art, cooking, working under the hood of the car, doing crafts. They need to see us doing that, doing sports, riding a bike, you know, bungee jumping, zip lining. I don't care what it is, do something. Get out in nature, go to the park. There's parks everywhere in most communities. Call up some friends, get together. Make some lists of all the things you can possibly imagine. Go to your local tourist, one of those, sometimes they have those tourist trap um, locations where they have all the free brochures. Look at all the things to do in your community in those tourist books, and then go do them if you haven't done them. You know, there are just, my book is going to be packed with ideas too.
Awesome.
So,
Well, thank you so much. And
you're welcome.
I look forward to sharing this with others. And I know some people are watching live right now. So I'm looking forward to seeing any of the comments. And have a great rest of your night. And thank you for inspiring people.
Thank you, Lisa, for having me. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Take care.
All right. And we're going to stop our